Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is not just another headline from Europe, it is a warning signal for the entire world. What began as a silent, shadowy operation in the cold waters of the Baltic Sea quickly turned into one of the most serious NATO security moments in recent history. A Russian shadow ship, operating under false identity and moving quietly through international waters, triggered an incident that exposed how fragile modern civilization really is. No missiles were launched, no cities were bombed, and yet, within hours, critical infrastructure was damaged, military alarms were raised, and NATO's response was instant. This is the full story step by step of how a single covert maritime action sent shockwaves through Europe, how NATO reacted faster than anyone expected, and why this moment may mark a turning point in modern warfare. The Baltic Sea is not just a body of water, it is a strategic nerve center. It connects northern Europe to the global economy and acts as a digital highway beneath the waves. Beneath its surface lies a dense web of undersea cables that carry internet traffic, financial transactions, military communications, satellite coordination signals, and energy control data. These cables are the invisible arteries of the modern world. Cut them, and entire nations feel the impact instantly. For years, NATO planners have warned that undersea infrastructure is one of the most vulnerable targets in any future conflict. Unlike military bases, these cables are unguarded. Unlike airports or ports, they are out of sight, and unlike missiles, damage to them can be denied, delayed, and disguised as an accident. Russia understands this better than almost any country. Long before the first cable went dark, NATO intelligence agencies were tracking unusual maritime behavior in the Baltic Sea. Ships with unclear ownership, vessels registered to shell companies, cargo ships that carried no obvious cargo, research vessels that conducted no public research. These ships moved slowly, often hovering over specific seabed locations, then disappearing for days before reappearing under a different flag. This network of vessels is commonly referred to as Russia's shadow fleet. They are not warships, they carry no visible weapons, but they serve a strategic purpose. They collect intelligence, they map undersea infrastructure, they test response times, and when needed, they carry out operations designed to stay just below the threshold of open war. On the night of the incident, one such vessel entered a sensitive zone between Finland and Estonia. Officially, it was listed as a commercial ship. Its paperwork appeared clean. Its crew transmitted routine signals. Everything looked normal until it didn't. The ship slowed to an unusual speed directly above a known cable junction point. Its AIS tracking system, which allows authorities to identify and follow vessels, suddenly went offline. That alone raised alarms. Ships rarely lose AIS coverage accidentally in such controlled waters. Then sonar sensors detected something else. Subsea movement, not fishing activity, not routine maintenance, not natural seabed shifts. This was precise, deliberate, and mechanical. Within minutes, multiple undersea cables experienced signal loss. The traffic between northern Europe and the wider internet rerouted abruptly. Military communication systems switched to encrypted backups. Financial networks registered unusual latency spikes. Energy grid control systems moved into redundancy mode. To most civilians, nothing dramatic seemed to happen. No lights went out, no sirens sounded, but behind the scenes, NATO command centers went into high alert. This was not an accident. Undersea cables are built to withstand extreme conditions, storms, pressure, temperature shifts. They do not fail simultaneously without a cause. And when several cables go down in the same area at the same time during suspicious ship activity, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. This was sabotage. Within minutes of the first reports, NATO's Maritime Command was activated. Naval forces from multiple countries were alerted simultaneously. Surveillance drones were launched. Patrol aircraft were redirected. Satellite imaging was tasked to track the shadow ships' movements in real time. What happened next surprised even seasoned military analysts. NATO did not hesitate. There was no delay, no confusion, no public silence. Instead, NATO moved faster than it ever had in a gray zone incident. Warships from nearby NATO states were dispatched to the area. Anti-submarine aircraft began sweeping the waters. Underwater drones were deployed to inspect the damaged cables. Cyber defense units were placed on maximum alert, anticipating follow-up attacks on digital systems. Within hours, NATO publicly acknowledged the incident. This alone was extraordinary. Traditionally, incidents involving undersea cables are handled quietly. Attribution takes weeks. Governments avoid naming suspects. Diplomacy works behind closed doors. But this time, NATO chose visibility over ambiguity. Officials confirmed that critical infrastructure had been damaged. They confirmed that suspicious maritime activity was being investigated, and they made it clear that the alliance was treating the incident as a coordinated hostile act. Behind the scenes, intelligence agencies were already connecting the dots. The shadow ship's route matched known Russian intelligence patterns. Its crew composition raised red flags. Its sudden departure from the area immediately after the cables failed pointed to a deliberate operation. Satellite imagery showed equipment consistent with undersea manipulation capabilities. This was not improvisation. This was preparation. Russia has invested heavily in undersea warfare capabilities over the last decade. Specialized submarines, deep-sea drones, cable, tapping technology, civilian-looking vessels adapted for covert missions. The doctrine is simple: disrupt without declaring war, destabilize without triggering Article 5, and test NATO's resolve. But this time, the test produced an unexpected result. NATO's response was not just military, it was strategic. First, naval presence in the Baltic Sea was dramatically increased. Warships from multiple countries began continuous patrols. Surveillance coverage expanded. The message was clear: the sea was no longer unmonitored. Second, NATO activated joint undersea infrastructure protection protocols. This included real-time data sharing between member states, coordinated sonar coverage, and rapid repair task forces positioned near vulnerable cable routes. Third, and most importantly, NATO escalated politically. Alliance leaders held emergency consultations. Defense ministers issued coordinated statements. The language used was stronger than ever before for a gray's own attack. Words like hostile action, deliberate sabotage, and unacceptable escalation appeared repeatedly. This mattered because modern warfare is as much about perception as power. By responding instantly and publicly, NATO removed Russia's favorite weapon, deniability. The shadow ship could no longer hide behind technicalities. The damage could no longer be dismissed as coincidence, and the world could no longer ignore the vulnerability of undersea infrastructure. Russia, for its part, denied everything. Officials claimed the incident was a technical malfunction. Russian media suggested NATO was exaggerating. Some outlets blamed Western companies for poor maintenance. Others hinted at natural causes, but the damage had already been done not to the cables, but to the narrative. For the first time, NATO demonstrated that undersea sabotage would not be treated as a minor incident or a technical issue. It would be treated as a security threat to the entire alliance. This sets a powerful precedent. Because if cables can be attacked without consequences, then nothing is safe. Not satellites, not power grids, not financial systems, not communication networks. The modern world depends on invisible systems, and those systems are now frontline targets. What makes this incident even more dangerous is its timing. Europe is already under pressure, the war in Ukraine continues, energy security remains fragile, cyber attacks are increasing, political tensions are high. An attack on undersea infrastructure is not just a technical disruption, it is psychological warfare. It creates uncertainty, it erodes trust, it forces governments into crisis mode, and that is exactly the point. But NATO's instant response sent a different signal. It showed preparedness, it showed unity, it showed that the alliance has learned from past mistakes. For years, critics argued that NATO would be slow to respond to Gray's own threats, that hybrid warfare would paralyze decision-making, that ambiguity would create hesitation. This incident proved otherwise. Within hours, NATO coordinated military, political, and intelligence actions across multiple countries. There was no visible disagreement, no public confusion, no delayed messaging. This level of coordination is not accidental. It is the result of years of planning, exercises, and lessons learned from previous crises. And it sends a warning far beyond the Baltic Sea. Because if undersea cable sabotage triggers an instant NATO response, then the cost of such actions increases dramatically. For Russia, this changes the calculation. Hybrid warfare relies on uncertainty. It relies on slow reactions. It relies on fractured responses. When those conditions disappear, the strategy loses effectiveness. That does not mean such attacks will stop. In fact, they may increase, but it does mean that future operations will carry greater risk, diplomatic, economic, and military. As investigations continue, repair teams are already working to restore the damaged cables. Underwater drones are mapping the seabed. New protective measures are being installed, and NATO is accelerating plans to permanently secure undersea infrastructure. This incident will not be forgotten. It will be studied in military academies, analyzed in intelligence briefings, referenced in future policy decisions, because it marks a moment when invisible warfare became impossible to ignore. The oceans are no longer just trade routes and borders. They are battlegrounds, and the cables beneath them are now strategic targets. What happens next will shape the future of global security. Will Russia continue to test the limits? Will NATO harden its defenses further? Will undersea warfare become the next major front? One thing is certain. The age of silent sabotage is ending, and the world just got a glimpse of how fast the response can be when the invisible lines that hold civilization together are attacked. If you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to stay tuned, because the story of modern warfare is no longer written only on land or in the air, it is unfolding deep beneath the sea.